What's up, everyone? Today we are talking to Travis, who's a captain in his local fire department and EMS support. He also works at the local hospital in the radiology department, and he has a really interesting case for us to review today about cold weather injuries and hypothermia. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Travis, welcome to the podcast. Really excited to have you here. Not only because we're friends on social media, this is the first time we've talked face to face, but I get to learn more about you and your backstory, which I'm super excited about as well. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate having me.
So, Travis, it sounds like you're in the world of rescue. You're captain in the fire department, EMS services. How did you even get to that position, and how did you land all the way in Alaska? Are you from there?
Yeah, so I am actually born and raised here in Alaska. I have lived outside for a long period of time, and my mom kind of brought us back here when I was a kid. So we left for a little bit, came back, left for a little bit, and came back. So kind of stuck this time.
Really cool. And whereabouts in Alaska are you?
I live down in Homer on the Kenai Peninsula, right on the ocean, pretty much.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I was out
Mhm.
in Alaska in August, towards the end of it, just past the Ray Mountains or the Ray
Mhm.
Ranges, I believe it's called. And it's such beautiful country. One of the things that I loved out there was the biodiversity of the different plants there in incredibly cold climates. Like it was frost and then rain and then frost and then like warm t-shirt type of weather. It was so crazy to see almost all three seasons in one given time and to see that there was still edible plants around and berries and stuff. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, we get that down where I live too. So we have a bay that sits right out in front of basically my house in the town. And so we've got a north and a south side. And it's interesting to see what grows on the north side versus the south side just because of the exposure to sunshine.
Mm.
And the fungi is really awesome out here. And sometimes we just had a flash freeze where there's still frozen blueberries on the bushes. So we could walk around and pick frozen blueberries and they're great.
That sounds awesome. That
Yeah.
sounds awesome. So, Travis, how did you find your way to rescuing people and serving your community like that?
When I first got to Homer, I was working for an out of state company remotely, and I had wanted to do something after some of my previous work. I wanted to give back to the community in some way, and somebody said, "Oh, you should look into the fire department." So I went and said, "Hey, I'm interested." And as soon as I like said my sentence of like I'm interested, call dropped, and there was one gentleman in the fire station. We live in a very small town, and he's like, "You want to do a ride along?" So I said, "Great." So we have three Russian villages that are connected to town, basically. They're old believers. So the call was in one of those, and I went with him. And while we were there, ended up being a slight cardiac call, nothing too, exciting, but we ended up having to transport the patient. And I'm looking at this other gentleman thinking, there's no possible way he's going to be able to move her alone. So here I am, random Joe off the street, and I was like, there's a need here. So
Mhm.
my mom always told me, if you can, you should. So I
I love
signed
that.
up. Yeah,
It sounds like your mom's someone that can leave an impression for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
That's really cool. And so you've been doing that for a while. And the fire department and EMS service, is it one thing like
Yep.
together? Okay.
So since we are such a small town, you have to be able to do a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
So over about 10 years or so, I did a ton of training for like wildland fire, interior, exterior fire attack. I did search and rescue management and even some fire investigation because kind of a positive is that it's a small town. You do get to wear a lot of cool hats. You get to like put your toe in a lot of different waters. But downside is there aren't that many calls.
Mhm.
And so you get a little bit of run rust, in
Sure.
between. So we have a very small group of folks, but they're very focused and they're very dedicated.
That's awesome. And I think one thing that I do love, I used to work in a smaller community, is like everyone literally knows everyone. And it's such an interesting feel because to practice medicine and to serve communities like that, like it does feel like you're treating and taking care of your own people.
Oh,
That
totally.
definitely gets lost in a bigger city or even a slightly bigger setup too.
I see that all the time here. In fact, unfortunately, when my brother passed away, I was on his call, so I mean, I have run on my own family before. I run on family and friends, extended family and a lot of friends. And so that's another cool thing about working in the hospital too, is I can help them in the field. And then when they transition here, like I can actually be part of their healthcare here too. So it is a small community and
Yeah.
it does have its positives and negatives.
Yeah, definitely. But kudos to you for providing that service to a community in need and to bearing the emotional type of burden of that as well. Because I like just from happenstance, like I know that from being adjacent to that, that it is a big weight to carry, and it kudos to you for being the type of person who could bear that weight.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's not without help. I do lean on my counselors on occasion, so I get help when I need it.
Right on. And I'm curious. We'll talk about this probably after our case, but since you can speak to both fire and cold, it'll be cool to just get some more knowledge from you and more insight on your thoughts on what happened out west with the fires out in California and LA. But I'm curious about this case. So why don't you paint the picture for us on this call where you found someone who was pretty darn cold, right?
It's kind of a bizarre set of circumstances, to be perfectly honest. Like I said, I do work at the hospital, and that day I was here, and somebody that I knew, we have our whole town is kind of on a bluff that faces south, kind of slopes southward.
Hmm.
And so, in a place where I used to live on an old road, this individual that came in to talk to me, she lives there. And the person that we ended up finding is her neighbor. So apparently, the patient ended up complaining of the worst headache they had ever had in their entire life. She said it was so bad that it made her eyes feel like they were bugging out, and she actually even looked in the mirror and had to check and make sure that they weren't. So that to me says that there might be a buildup of pressure somewhere. But
Yeah.
she's a tough, tough lady, and it's Alaska. There's a lot of tough folks out here, and she said that she was just going to go sleep it off. And my friend that came in and told me all this had told her, you need to go to the emergency room immediately. Anytime somebody says worst pain of their life,
Hmm.
go to the emergency room. But she said no, she was going to sleep it off. So the next morning, my friend tried to call her, no response. Tried for about 2 hours, no response. So she herself isn't in physical shape to be able to walk down to this individual's house. So she called another friend. So ended up two people separately ended up going down there looking for this patient. One of them even brought a dog to try and search the area, and they couldn't find her. And so my friend's like, "You've got some history with backcountry stuff. I hunt and trap out here, in the backwoods, so I'm fairly comfortable and probably not going to go sliding down a ravine accidentally."
Hmm.
So I told her, based on the signs that the other people had identified, one of those being, and this is kind of part of the mystery, that there was blood on the floor in her house and a lot of it, that they were very concerned. So I said, you need to call the police. Again, this is Alaska. So my parents always used to say everybody in Alaska is either running from something or lying about it. People come out here to try and like get away from everything. They don't come out here to like invite folks over largely. So she didn't want the cops coming out there. And I was like, it's a matter of life and death, potentially if there's that much blood, I hadn't seen it at that point, they should go and they should do a welfare check. But she was totally adamant that no, 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 I'm not going to do that. I refuse.
Hmm.
So I said, okay. I ran out there. I got to the top of the road. Kind of a something we do in situations like this. I took a picture of the numbers at the top of the road, so if I needed to call in reinforcements, I knew where to send them.
That's smart.
Um,
That's really smart.
Thanks. I brought my EMS radio. I had a pistol on me because it is the backwoods.
Mhm.
Even if you're in town, it's still the backwoods. I had just had a bad call with a moose about a month earlier or so. So that was very fresh in my mind. We had just had a huge dump of snow, and one of the neighbors told me that she may be out trying to knock down trees that had like excessive snow load on them.
Mhm.
So I was kind of looking for signs of that. And then when I went down to our cabin, which is about a quarter mile hike down the hill, I didn't see anything that really stood out to me. There was a lot of footprints, obviously, from those two people. The door was ajar, so I looked inside, and sure enough, there was a lot of blood. And as I'm sure you know, it's super easy to overguess how much blood is there,
Mhm.
and I can't really put a volume on it, but to me, first quick glance, it looked like a liter of blood. So I was like, this is serious. I looked outside, searched around the house, no signs of blood, but I did pick up her trail and it was heading directly west. And so that's straight out into the woods. So I tracked her out into the woods. Snow was about, mid shin deep or
Mhm.
so. I went about an eighth of a mile and I saw lower than me, kind of on that downward slope, there was trees out there 100 yards, 150 yards that definitely had some recent chainsaw marks on them. So I trudged down there, and while I was looking around, I wasn't seeing any fresh tracks. So I started working back towards her house,
Mhm.
and that's where I ran into a gully, and it was significant. Where I crossed it, it wasn't as dangerous as it was in other places. Looking down farther down the bluff, it was obviously extremely sketchy. But when you cross those type of gullies, one of the first things you always do is you look uphill because you don't want something falling on you or what have you.
Or
Um,
Wildcat for a free lunch. But
you
that's
know,
crazy. So you saw like a liter of blood in her home,
uh,
and it what was it? Did it look like it was like on the floor, or did she have like handprints anywhere, or do you think it was from like the legs from like a chainsaw, or like was it like a
yeah.
hand thing and she was like wiping all over?
Well, that was kind of what went through my mind initially. I've seen chainsaw wounds. We see them up here. I don't want to say all the time, but
Mhm.
we're not unfamiliar. So there was a pool of blood at the base of some stairs, and then next to a chair, there was rolls of toilet paper where it looked like somebody had like held them to a wound. So that's where I was really thinking that it was a chainsaw wound. I was like, sounds like what how somebody would kind of treat that with direct pressure.
Mhm.
So that's what was going through my mind. So when I crossed the gully and I checked up above me, I saw a body, kind of high up in the gully. So I radioed dispatch and told them that, I think I had eyes on the patient, and then I was going to try and get up to them. So I had to scramble and crawl up the gully. You don't see what's underneath it. You don't see the
Mhm.
rocks and stuff. You don't know how stable the snow and the ice is.
Mhm.
So you're punching through, and it was tough. I'm
Yeah,
not
I
in
bet. Like,
I'm not in
you
as good a
probably
shape.
stun bullets. What do you think the angle was of that gully?
I'm not really sure actually. That's the first
More than
time
a
I've been asked that.
45, or
It
is that
was it was probably
yeah,
about like that. So
that's pretty
it
darn
was
steep.
brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying, like, you're walking through at least shin deep snow. Gully,
Mhm.
sometimes it can accumulate, more snow there at an angle that's more than 45, and what time of day was this?
It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we had
Okay.
about 3.5 hours of daylight left.
Yeah, so scary, scary time, to start the coordination, and I don't know if it was sunny or not, but, just a little bit of
Right.
heat in the morning, like, that sounds like a slipping and breaking,
Oh
big
man.
pieces of snow too. So very
Yeah.
scary situation. What else, so what ha happened after that? You found the body, you were scrambling to go get her, then what?
So, as I'm sure you know, sometimes when we get on scene with stuff like this, we start calling to the people before we make it to them,
Mhm,
because a lot of times that can establish, level of consciousness. It can also establish they've got a patent airway. So I started yelling at her. I knew her name, so I was calling her name, and I did see once I got close enough that she clocked me visually,
mhm,
so that's good. She was kind of trying to speak, but it sounded like it was really muffled, like her voice is super muffled. And I saw that she wasn't really moving her jaw at the time. Wasn't sure at the time what that was about.
mhm,
I saw something else that kind of struck me as odd, because I was coming up below her and her feet were facing downhill. I noticed that she had two left shoes on, and they were obviously from different pairs of shoes.
mhm,
And I just clocked it and just kind of kept going, but I thought that was odd.
mhm.
But later on, I think that kind of factors into the signs and symptoms. But once I got up to her, I asked her, are you hurt or just cold? And through grit teeth, she said, cold.
Mm.
but she wasn't able to really verbalize much at that time. She had froth on her mouth and blood down her shirt, and it looked like she had had some sort of strike wound that went from like her right jaw up across her face and kind of ended in the temporal section on her left side of her face. So I think that was from when she fell into the gully. She struck like, I think it's probably a 5-inch diameter branch, like right on her face. Yeah, I did. First thing was, once I established that she was cold, I didn't have a lot with me. So I radioed dispatch, kind of told them what I had found, that she was down, she was conscious, breathing, but she was likely hypothermic, unknown downtime.
Mhm.
Her clothes were totally saturated. So after that, I started taking my clothes off.
Mhm.
So I took off my jacket and I had kind of an overshirt on. I wrapped her legs in the overshirt. I put my jacket on her, and I had a knit hat that I put on her, and then went in for a cuddle. So I got to her left side. I put my right arm and right leg under her and just kind of held her. And I could hear EMS and fire, chatter that they had a medic unit incoming. And I kind of had to make a bit of a judgment call. As we established, it's a very, very steep angle in that gully. And I thought the proper way to knock this out is going to be to get a rope rescue crew here.
Mhm.
But we're looking realistically at about 2 hours before we'd be getting her out of there.
Mhm.
And just observing her, I didn't feel like we had that much time. And so judgment call, when they got to the top of the driveway, I told them that I wanted a scoop. I assume you're familiar with those, but
Are they
it's
the
like,
plastic with the metal rails?
so that's more like like Stokes style. This is like a backboard that it breaks at the top and the base,
Yep.
and then you can extend it. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
So I told them to bring one of those and some spider straps, and we were just, in my opinion, gonna muscle her out of there. So
Mhm.
the EMS crew got there. They sent 3 folks down. They scrambled down to where we were, and we got her packaged up. We had to clear the brush that was above her that I think she had hit,
Mm.
just so we could kind of make our way that way out. But we would it was very sketchy, and I think my chief kind of gave me the hairy eyeball
Yeah.
afterward for how we got her out of there. But I would have to plant my foot in the ice and snow.
Mhm.
We'd move her, up a little bit, and so my foot would keep her from sliding down. We'd
Mhm.
try and scramble and get some footing, and then do it
Wow.
again, and we just kind of kept doing that up all the way out, and got her out.
Holy smokes, that is a situation. In retrospect, would that change what you would have brought out with you on a scout mission like that? And has it changed in protocols in your department on what your EMS crew stocks? Like, are there more carabiners, pulleys, low angle rescue type of stuff now?
Well,
Are you talking about like that type of education in your
do
department?
have some education with high angle and low angle rescue. We have a truck dedicated to it because we didn't know what we were getting into, and because this wasn't a formal dispatch out. I was basically kind of running on my own. So I think, well, sad thing is too, is I carry a really just awesome trauma kit in my truck, for situations similar like this.
Yeah.
And I've got space blankets, heat pads, all kinds of stuff. And I didn't bring it with me because, I had no idea what I was getting into.
Mm.
So really, I had my gun, my ice spikes, and my radio. So it was, I mean, there was definitely a lot more that I would have brought had I
Mhm.
had any inclination of what kind of call it was going to be.
Holy
But
smokes.
yeah, but
Absolutely.
even when I found the blood, I was like,
Mhm.
something's going on here, and I really wish I had my trauma kit. But then it would have been a whole nother, half-mile hike, to
Mhm.
get gear and come back.
Yeah.
So
Wow, what a wild story. And when you finally got her to some level of safety, or even before you did that, when you first made that call out, were you able to find any other injuries? Was that main bleed from what you found in the house, her face, or what
so
did you
I
find something else?
no, I wondered that too. I wondered if, like, obviously the strike wound, came after.
Mhm.
So while I was sitting there cheek to cheek with her, I looked and she had a lot of blood caked in her nares. And
Mhm.
so I really wasn't quite putting together what was going on. But when we started to transition her from the field to the medic unit, I saw her GCS change. So she went from like a 7, I'll give her, in the field,
Mhm.
to before we arrived at the hospital, she was down to a 4.
Holy
So
smokes.
yeah, so she
Yeah.
went downhill like pretty quickly upon getting warm.
Yeah.
Um, so she also had some Cushing's triad.
Mhm.
So that everything started to kind of point to intracranial hemorrhage and intracranial pressure building, and so all the pieces started to click there, and I started to think, well, this is probably from excessively high blood pressure. She ended up blowing some vessels in here, and I think she was bleeding out of her nose from the high blood pressure.
For our viewers who aren't medical, can you describe what the Cushing's triad is?
Sure. So you start at slow breaths. We're going to notice slow, potentially shallow breaths. The BP is going to be through the roof. For this patient, when we first clocked her BP, I think it was like 248 over 130. So
Mhm.
you know, I think our standards now is we say that you're hypertensive at about 135 or so. So, I mean, that's what mine is. So that's how I know that. And your heart rate drops. So we notice those things like pretty immediately. On the medic unit, there was myself and 2 other folks, and I had the head. So
Mhm.
during my process of evaluating her head, I was checking her eyes, and her left pupil was a 5. So,
Okay.
and it was non-responsive to light, which is as you know, super bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Her her right pupil was about a 3. So for the viewers that are medical, they should always be equal bilaterally, and they
Mhm.
should be equally responsive. And so since they weren't, and her right pupil was slightly, sluggishly responsive, that was pointing to more intracranial pressure
Mhm.
potentially. And so all those pieces started to click, even the shoes, maybe had something wrong with her level of consciousness. She wasn't quite in her right mind, put on the wrong shoes to go outside.
Wow, that's super scary because not only does she have this potential high blood pressure, bleed inside the brain, which would signify that worst headache of her life with like a subarachnoid type of bleed. She is been in the cold for God knows how long amount of time, and the fact that her level of consciousness decreased as she was getting warmed before she
Mhm.
got to the hospital definitely could be related to the what's going on inside her brain. But at the same time, that could be a result of the rewarming process itself with some after drop where sometimes when the extremities get warmed or if any part of the body gets warmed a little bit too quickly before the core, all that cool blood gets defrosted, goes back to the core, and then wreaks havoc on the system as well. So what a critical case.
Yeah,
um
super.
any interventions that was done en route before you reached the hospital?
So there aren't in our protocols. There aren't a lot of interventions. If she needs fluids, we warm fluids for her. If she needed O's, we warm the O's. But her SpO2 actually looked pretty good. Temperature wise, she was sitting at like mid high 80s. So for us, that's right on the edge of like serious hypothermia or mid hypothermia for us. So mainly it was just get her warm. And
Mhm.
so we always ask ourselves, what's going to kill you first? And so we were noticing signs of the increased intracranial pressure. We were noticing, obviously, that she was hypothermic. So what do? Well, we have to treat the hypothermia. So
Mhm.
kind of crossed fingers and applied some diesel.
Yeah. Wow. And, so you started to rewarm her and you used, what do you have for rewarming in your setup?
So we've got environmental heat. We do live kind of in the, like I said, the backwoods, so we don't have, too fancy of a setup, but we've got a lot of heat pads. So
Okay.
first things first, we cut clothes, remove clothes without trying to manipulate the joints. So that was done immediately. We tried to dry her off best we could.
Mhm.
She was soaked. We don't know exactly how long she was down, but the first person to go out and check for her, I think, was at 10.
Okay.
So at a minimum 3 hours.
Okay.
So Yeah, it's hard to really tell. But
Wow. Wow. What a story. What a story. I'm not sure if you're in touch with that patient, but it sounds like she made it and you saved her life. Is that right?
yeah, yeah, she made it. I've been talking to her and her sisters. So her sisters flew up here to Alaska immediately. She We stabilized her at the hospital here, and then she was flown to Alaska Regional. Um, so the family came up and met her basically there. Um, it's been kind of miraculous because, you know, as I said, I get to see kind of both sides of the call. So immediately, I mean, they treated me for minor hypothermia, but I was fine. I
Mhm.
was just cold. But I came into radiology, and the radiologist and I are good friends, and he showed me her scans, and it was
Big one?
bleak. It was, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, both ventricles, completely full of blood, and
Mhm.
the sulci had all like flattened out. I mean, it was like, holy
Wow.
cow. And he told me, he's like, I don't think she's going to make it. And we had a surgeon on hand because I had called the trauma alert,
Mhm.
and the surgeon was like, doesn't look good.
Did he drill?
They ended up drilling. They
And
drilled
a
her.
window?
What's that?
Did they do a window as well? Like a
I
full
don't know.
square and no?
I I didn't see that. I did see some of her bandages after the
Okay.
fact. This
Holy
was like
smokes.
a couple days before Christmas, and so
Yeah.
I drove up day before Christmas to see her and her sisters,
Mhm.
and you could definitely tell they had drilled her, and she had bandages all over her head and stuff. But
Wow.
the sisters were told on the phone that they probably had the decision to make of like pulling the
Mm.
tube, and so when the sisters arrived and she was actually like blinking and looking around, they were all floored. So at first I just communicated with the sisters for a while, but now I've been talking actually to the patient herself, and yeah, it's wild. Didn't think
That
that
is
would
wild.
happen.
What, like, an amazing story because she wouldn't be here today if not for you, like, you actually found her, which I think is one of the harder parts. You had to do literal investigative work and tracking to find her, to think what the thought process was, and, like, so lucky to have you.
I feel like I was just in the right place at the right time, and I think I was the right tool.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
I think if we had called, the local law enforcement, I really am not confident that they would have found her. It was such a bizarre circumstance.
Absolutely. Like, even when you found her, like, you didn't have a whole lot of material with you to help, and the fact that you got her warmer, you got her everything coordinated, and you got her out of that ravine with that setup is super impressive.
Well,
Just
thanks.
for viewers, like it is so hard for that angle. Like the angle you were mentioning was more than like it sounds more than 45 degrees, and you're basically stopping progress or securing your progress with your own body limb. Like you
Mm,
don't have any pulleys or things securing that line to give you some breaks. So you guys really did an amazing job and muscled it out. So, kudos for that.
well, thanks. It was definitely not the ideal situation. Had we had the time and we had our rescue rig there, I would have loved to have her in a Stokes basket and,
Mhm,
tied off, in case there was the chance that we could have slipped. But
mhm.
I felt like we needed to get out of there right then.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you gotta make that decision knowing what kind of resources you have. Like, it's the same in any kind of medical setup where conditions aren't ideal. Like, I
Mhm.
work in a small critical access hospital, and the guidelines say something, but if you don't have that something and the specialist is like an hour or two away, then you got to make do and you got to figure out what will work for that patient at that time with the resources you have.
It's
So
really
really
true.
cool that you did that. One of the things that I'm curious about, and I think a lot of our viewers would love to know, is for the cases of severe hypothermia, because everyone knows what it's like to be cold. We've all shivered before, we've all been uncomfortable before. But what differentiates severe hypothermia from regular shivers or feeling mild hypothermia like you had in that situation?
So I think that the biggest sign and symptom is that you stop shivering. So I think that's kind of the you're in big trouble
Mm.
symptom, at least for everybody to identify if you're not taking a core temp, if you can't, you're in the field or something. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's a huge thing because your ability to shiver is such an effective way for you to generate heat, and without
Mhm.
that, your body's only going to go down. It's only going to decline. And I would add on top of that, like one of the big things that we see in like emergency departments and rescues with a lot of the homeless population near us is the mental status changes as well.
Oh, it's true.
So
Yeah.
if you don't have like a thermometer, one of the big distinguishing things that we've seen is if the person is cold plus any kind of alteration in how they're thinking, speaking, balancing, or moving, we call that moderate to severe hypothermia, and we go down that kind of treatment protocol. And you were mentioning thermometers as well. The main reason why it's like, even for our viewers, even for myself, it's not really realistic to use thermometers out there unless you have a really expensive one that's for severe hypothermia. Most thermometers don't go below 32 degrees Celsius.
Mhm.
So it's even if you have your thermometer with it, rectal or wherever, it's not going to be helpful to distinguish the class of hypothermia. So having those nice big distinguishing symptoms, whether it's stopping shiver, whether it's they look like a drunken sailor or they're unconscious, those are some key things to kind of gauge how serious the situation is. Because we do see it. One of the things that I carry often now when I'm in the backcountry is something that I can not only use to rewarm myself, but something that seconds as a litter too. So I have this. It's a malar. I forget what the term is, but it's a malar litter basically.
Hmm.
So malar material, ripstop nylon on the outside, and like 6 or 7 rungs on either side. So I ordered like the extra large, so it fits over like a little bit of a sleeping bag. Or if you
That's
have a
good. Yeah.
really big Arctic sleeping bag, it can go on the inside and then the sleeping bag on top of it. But for extrication, like I really like it. My wife and I, we just started skiing again. I haven't been skiing in over a decade, and she just started. So it was funny on her first lesson. I was just in the background making sure she was safe. But the students were falling all over. One girl twisted her knee, and I had like this setup just ready to kind of move them out of the way if needed. And it's good practice to think of that type of things. Think about the
Mhm.
most likely problems that might happen in the situation or activity that you're doing, and be comfortable carrying that amount of equipment with you too, because you figure out really quickly like what's super useful, what can be used in multiple different ways, and
Mhm.
what's just dead hammers, you know.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. It's been mind opening to see what types of cases you guys are having out there in Alaska, because we don't see that much of craziness out here in Maine, but definitely a crazy story there. I'm curious and excited to hear your position as a firefighter and a captain on the fires in LA, and what you think happened, what you would do if you were a homeowner there, and what kind of equipment you would have if you were trying to get out of that situation.
Boy, that's a big question. um, there's so many variables there, and honestly, up here in Alaska, we don't have a lot of visibility as to what's going down there. It's like almost third person that we're getting a lot of the updates here. I have heard a couple podcasts that had folks that lost their homes on there, and they kind of told their story. For me, I always have a go bag, and in the go bag, it's got my essentials, medications that I'm currently on, or something like that. I have some similar one for my girlfriend, and it's just like the bare essentials. Like we have a dog and a cat, so we have food ready to go, and we're not in threat of like they're going through.
Mhm,
So just a lot of the bare essentials that you can throw into a car and get out of there as quick as you can. I know that a lot of people wanted to stay, and they were thinking, maybe it's different for me. Maybe my house is in a different spot and they're watching fires like creep up the streets. Leave early. Please leave early, because I've been on a couple of wildland fires in Alaska, and we have had folks that have tried to remain, and we've had to divert resources to go make sure that they're cool, and that
mm,
pulls resources from somewhere else. And maybe that was the resource or resources that we could have used to turn the fire.
mm,
And so that's bad. We don't want to make we don't want a patient to pop up injured, burnt, fallen down, or something like that, that we have to pull resources off of an active burn to go rescue. So that's kind of huge too. I think people should have at least a basic emergency kit put together for themselves
Mhm.
for kind of like you were saying, kind of like anything. Like, I don't know you know, if everybody wants to carry around the fancy Mylar, kit that you have, that is pretty cool. I probably have one that's similar, but other people can carry a lot of water. I mean, water alone can save a lot of these folks' lives, I'm sure. But I think if they would have listened to the warnings in their neighborhoods and they had left early and tried not to linger, that would have been a big one. If they had stoked or stashed enough water, if they had their go bags, I think that probably would have saved a lot of lives.
Awesome. Those are all really good tips. Um, one thing that I will say for our viewers, if you're interested in knowing what I personally carry, both from a survival standpoint, but also from a medical standpoint, you can check it out on our website as well, survivaldoctors.com, and you can get my field guide for free. Basically, that's at survivenow.online/opt-in. So that's free for you guys, just so that you have your stuff readily stocked, because your first aid kit, the one that you just pick off the shelf, that's not going to cut it for the majority of anything that isn't a boo-boo.
Correct.
Absolutely.
What's funny is our environment is a little bit different, from we call it the lower 48. And
Mhm.
we could break down in our car on the way to the next big town, and you could be in a lot of trouble really quickly. So actually, when I first heard about you and stuff, I actually looked up your website and I saw your list of your kit on there, and it's really good. I
Awesome.
was
Thank
I
you.
was delighted to see that actually I have a lot of the stuff that's on your list. So that's cool. So that kind of reaffirmed, like, okay, well,
Mhm.
other smart people are looking at the same problem. But I even have the same water filter that you have on your list, and it works. I've used it.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that is acceptable from someone from Alaska. That's definitely big kudos to that, and our experts and our students who've made recommendations over the years as well. But go ahead, check out that link, get that free guide, and get trained too. Like both from a identification, immediate treatment, and knowing how to signal and coordinate care. Like you can literally be like Travis in that situation and save someone's life. Be the difference between someone not being here and being here tomorrow by just knowing those simple things and having some key items as well. So, Travis, thank you so much for sharing that story, sharing some wisdom, and giving us a pause to think about what we need to carry with us and what we need to learn to take care of the ones we love. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Is there anything that you want the viewers to know as your final words on the show?
What I would convey to folks, kind of what Jody was cautioned with on the first day. That's the patient. She said it's okay to use her name. She wants people to know, if you need help, get it early. If it's the worst pain you've ever experienced in your life, it's probably like that for a reason, and you need to get checked out immediately. Even if you have no medical training, it doesn't matter the level of medical training that you have. You should get that looked at. I think that's really kind of paramount. The other thing is, you know, as you were saying, look at your gear, check it out. And I was comparing my gear with yours because you never know when you're going to need it. We don't just think that you're going to walk out of your cabin and fall down a gully. So you got to go prepared. Even every time I get in my truck and I drive to Anchorage or something like that, I'm
Mhm.
prepared. I have my sleeping bags. I've got emergency blankets. I've got water enough for like probably 3 days just for myself. I've got food. I've got my emergency kit. I've got my trauma kit, everything you can think of, because you don't know. You don't plan for rolling your vehicle and being stuck out in a place where there's not going to be a vehicle coming by in 2 days, and how you're going to make a fire. The other thing is train with your gear. I have a lot of friends that fancy themselves as, outdoorsmen, but I'm like, do you know how to use a ferro rod? Yes, I know how to use a ferro rod. And it's like, okay, well, sometimes we have little clinics where we'll sit down and we'll kind of pound through some of that gear. And
Mhm.
a lot of folks don't know how to use a ferro rod, and it seems like it's simple, as you know. And so
Absolutely.
train
They
with your
watch
gear.
one YouTube video, they do it once in a nice dry environment with
Yeah.
tinder that they have readily prepared, but as soon as it starts raining, as it does in Alaska,
Oh, yeah.
with tinder that you need to salvage from the environment around you, it goes a different way.
It does. I had a buddy of mine. I don't want to take up too much of your time either, but I had a buddy of mine come up to do some bear hunting, and he came up from Georgia, and we went across the bay I was telling you about, and so there's no sun on that south side of the bay except for at the very end of the day,
Mhm.
and so lighting a fire there is different than lighting a fire on the north side, and so he had all this brand new kit, and he all of his gear was nice. Let me tell you, way nicer than mine. Embarrassingly so. And so he's like, "Well, I want to make a fire," and everything was wet. And I'm like, "Go for it." And he could not make a fire to save his life, literally.
Mm,
So we ended up like taking some logs that had rolled in from the sea, still fairly dry, in the middle. We split it.
mhm,
We ended up making tinder from cutting wood out of the inside of the core of the log, and that was the only way we could get a fire started. And most people don't think about that, I guess.
mhm. Absolutely. And that's why we do what we do. And we truly believe the combination between survival skills and medical skills and deep knowledge in both is what you need to be completely independent in those emergency situations when you can't rely on a rescue team and you're waiting for something to happen. And
Yeah.
you just need to know these skills so that everyone in your team gets to go home.
Yeah, it's true. I guess the last thing I would recommend is personal locator beacons.
Absolutely. Upgraded my Garmin this year, and, with this
Nice.
new iPhone, I think it has, like, a satellite phone in it
Yep, yep,
in some capacity.
yep.
So, yeah, definitely signaling is the one of the most important things. One of the most important tools that you can have and own as, someone trying to survive.
It's turned some of our 3-day search and rescues down to about 2 hours.
Mm,
So huge difference.
awesome. Travis, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. And thank you to Jody. I'm not sure if you're going to see this or listen to this. Thank you so much for allowing our viewers to listen to your story and to learn from your story as well. Thank you.
Can I give you her GoFundMe link too? Is
Absolutely.
is that appropriate? Okay.
Absolutely.
I'll send it
So
along.
Jody has a GoFundMe. She is recovering, and let's show her some love and send her some support. I'll put the link to her GoFundMe in the podcast description.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome.